What's up, everybody? Welcome. It's a live edition of Orange Bloods Live. What else would we be doing? I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is Chad Hastings. It's not the midday show. We're talking playoffs. The first playoff rankings of the year have been announced. We'll talk about Texas and Notre Dame and Oklahoma and all that jazz. Do us a solid. Hit that thumbs up button, like the channel, do all the things that we're going to ask you to do. Jump into the specs chat. Let us know in the comments section, like, what did you think? Chad, I'm curious. The Longhorns come in at number 11.
Yeah.
They aren't at the top of the two-loss pile of teams. They're second behind Notre Dame. I think there's a real interesting conversation to have about Notre Dame. But overall, I have to say my initial review of the rankings is that pretty favorable for Texas. I don't think there's anything shocking. I think Texas needed to be ahead of a whole bunch of teams. The only one they're not ahead of right now is Notre Dame, and that may prove to be problematic when it's all said and done, but not a bad first set of rankings for the number 11 Longhorns.
Yeah, and as we're looking now at the way they are putting out the bracket, for people to understand this, Texas is the 11th ranked team, but they're out of this top 12. So to make sure we're clear on that, Virginia has to be in because they're the ACC champion. So even though they are the number 14 seed, they have to slide up. And then that's why the Texas-Notre Dame discussion was so important. Notre Dame ends up as the 10 seed. And then, of course, you have to put Memphis in as the 12 seed. So as of this moment, Texas is not in the 12-team playoff. That was a discussion we had earlier, Catch, throughout the day. That answer is no. And we do have an indicator now of the two-loss team that would be above them. This is the one to me that's sort of acceptable. Not sure if I would have done the same thing, but Notre Dame above Texas obviously makes more sense than OU or Vanderbilt that they both beat, or a couple other teams. So what's your take on Notre Dame edging Texas out to start?
Well, I think that A&M's getting a lot of credit for the Notre Dame win, and Notre Dame's getting a lot of credit for the A&M loss to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that Texas will have going for them down the stretch in a world where they end up tied with Notre Dame, if they could do that, is that they've got A&M in front of them. They've got Georgia in front of them. Texas in two of their last three games, they have to play two of the top five teams in the debuting playoff poll. So there's a chance for, I think, Texas to move up. No real surprises, honestly. There's nothing that I'm looking at that felt catastrophically wrong. Not even as we go, for those that are wondering, it goes Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, A&M 3. I thought that's the right order of the undefeated teams.
Yeah.
Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, 4, 5, and 6. BYU's undefeated at 7, but they're not the same as the other undefeated teams. Texas Tech is 8th with 1 loss. That is a real interesting game this weekend. I think there's some real implications behind.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Texas, you don't want both of those two teams to be in the playoffs, and there's a world out there as of tonight where they both would be in the playoffs. I think there's some stuff that you've got to avoid there. Oregon 9, really interesting that Oregon.
That feels lower than I would have thought. I thought they'd be higher. I
think they should be ahead of BYU and Texas Tech.
Yeah.
But they've beaten nobody.
Yep. That's fair.
And I think that someone on Orange Bloods earlier today was talking about Oregon being a paper tiger. And I kind of feel like most of the teams in the country right now are paper tigers, but Oregon doesn't have, Oregon would be in a real problem, I think, with Texas and Oklahoma in a world where if they had 2 losses, Texas and Oklahoma have wins that are greater than theirs. So we'll go through the rankings again real quick. Notre Dame comes in at 10, Texas 11, Oklahoma 12, Utah 13, Virginia 14, Louisville 15, Vanderbilt 16. I think that's good for Texas. I mean, that's a real quality win. They've got wins over 12 and 16. It doesn't feel like that's what Notre Dame has. And so I'm real interested again over how they decided to slot those two teams. Georgia Tech 17, Miami 18, USC 19, Iowa 20, Michigan 21, Missouri 22, Washington 23, Pitt 24, Tennessee 25. I think every single team on that list has hopes. Tennessee with 3 losses may feel like the team in the top 25 with the lowest hopes, but it feels like all of those other teams can talk themselves into, if they win out, they can play their way in. And I think every team in these rankings will feel like just win your games and see what happens from there. Missouri's a really good example. They're 22, but they play number 3 A&M. You win that game, you put a rocket ship, I think, into that resume. And suddenly next week, a number 22 Missouri is probably, don't they have to be ahead of Utah or maybe even 14 Virginia with 1 loss? So a lot can happen in the coming weeks.
Yeah,
but it should be a lot of fun.
Let's throw this up here, Catch. Thanks to Tyler and the graphics department for getting things thrown in here, but this gives you a good look at where it is. The Red River teams, the first and second out, and there's the bracket that Catch just laid out for you, and those other teams. And Catch, to your point about Missouri, not only does Missouri have A&M coming up, which is the one everybody's thinking about, they also have OU coming up. They go to Norman, so that's an opportunity as well. The number 12 team is also on Missouri's schedule. They have 2 losses, and they are far from embarrassing. They are Bama and Vanderbilt, and both were competitive ball games. So that's a team, like you said, they got a chance to get the rocket ship going. So anytime you need that bracket, we've got it. If you guys want to throw in on the chat, let us know. Catch, this one came in. It's a big part of the discussion. Right now, it doesn't matter. If Texas wins the rest of the schedule and beats Georgia or the Aggies, they'll get in with 3 losses. Richard, that's a conversation coming maybe at some point. Right now, Catch, if I'm a Texas fan, I focus in on the number 5.
That doesn't make any sense.
If
Texas wins the rest of their schedule, that means that they would beat Georgia and A&M. They won't have 3 losses.
Right. I think Richard combined 2 ideas that sound like they don't go together. I think he means that
we should take Richard's comment down, and when Richard gets his thoughts correct, we can put him back up on the marquee.
Yeah, there might be a discussion later if Texas lost a 3rd game, but for me right now, it'd be focusing on that 5 spot where Georgia is. And when I'll throw it back up here. Obviously, Texas has that opportunity headed to Georgia. I'd be thinking about, you take their spot, you take their opportunity, you take their place. Clearly, you got A&M coming down the road as well, but that's the spot I'd be looking at. The other thing to consider here, Catch, 1 ACC team is in the bracket at this point, meaning in theory, the loser of the championship game wouldn't be in. Those 2 Big 12 teams, we got to keep an eye on. Do 2 Big 12 teams stay in? Because remember last year, the loser of the Big 12 and the loser of the ACC championship games shouldn't have been in the playoff, but Clemson messed that up. Clemson won with 3 losses and got in, but if it had gone to the chalk, they'd have been out, and the loser of the Big 12 game would have been out, and you'd have an extra spot. So Texas fans, Notre Dame fans specifically right now are really focusing in on that. If Notre Dame can keep winning, if Texas, keeps winning, but if there is a 3rd loss somewhere down the road, that's what you're looking for. Do you get extra spots in this deal? There are 2 extra spots in the normal situation, if you will. If you have a loser of a conference game that doesn't get in the playoff, then maybe you have 3 or maybe you have 4 spots. So we're going to have to see, how it plays out. But honestly, most of it laid out like I thought it would. They were pretty close. 1 through 5 was right on the AP, and there were a couple little changes, as it went through. But Texas, the first team out in this first ranking.
Yeah, I think on the Big 12 thing, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, Chad, and I wrote about it in my 10 thoughts from the weekend. Every team that's in the battle for a spot, an at-large spot, needs to root for either Tech or BYU to win both of those matchups. They're going to almost certainly play each other in the Big 12 championship game. And regardless of what happens this weekend, what you don't want is to create a situation where the committee doesn't want to punish. Because in order for them to split, it would mean the loser on Saturday wins the Big 12 championship game when it plays out. Now, look, if that's Texas Tech, that's a 2-loss Texas Tech getting in, and potentially a BYU that if they were to win this weekend, they might be number 4 next week.
Right. Yeah. And that would be dangerous. That would get you 2 Big 12 teams in theory. Plus, don't forget, that's a crowded Big 12, man. Cincinnati gets a little say in what happens. Tech could lose this weekend and be left out of the Big 12 title game, depending on how it plays out.
They could, but the most likely scenario at this point has them both in that game again. And I think everybody just needs to get their heads right that whatever happens this weekend, you don't need the opposite happening should those two teams play again.
Yeah.
And, that's a spot. That is that someone, and it probably is not let me tell you what that is. 2-loss Texas ain't worried about what happens with the Big 12. 3-loss Texas won't make it unless those two teams, one wins and eliminates the other. If both of the two teams in the Big 12 are in, then you can't, I don't think, have a scenario unless a lot of teams start losing games that we're not. Notre Dame being among them. I mean, when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, they get Navy at home. They're at Pitt, which based on these rankings, I guess you've got to give Pitt some respect there.
Dude, Pitt's got a lot. Pitt's got 3 big games coming against teams that'll matter in this discussion.
Yeah. And so, but like if you're Texas, quite honestly, in 2 weeks, if Texas were to beat Georgia and Notre Dame were to hold serve, Texas is going to leapfrog Notre Dame, I think, because of adding that extra quality of win against what would be still a top 10 Georgia team, I would imagine. Honestly, what's on the line for Texas and Georgia in that regular season game is each other's spot.
Yep.
Georgia loses, they're probably like sitting at 11 where Texas is-ish. And if you're Oklahoma, you might go, maybe we should be, suddenly it's not a head-to-head issue with Oklahoma and Georgia.
Yeah, and obviously Oklahoma's got Alabama coming up, a huge statement game. If they really are better than a lot of people thought they were, they're going to get a chance to prove it, and that's in Tuscaloosa, and they're going to be you're going to have to pay attention to them, obviously, if they pull that one off.
I think, look, Ohio State, Indiana, they're in. A&M is in if they win this. They're in if they beat Missouri. If they lose to Missouri, it could be interesting to see how if they were to lose in Austin and be 10-2, but lose 2 of their last 4 against arguably the 2 toughest teams that they would play. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think A&M still might be okay, but they put themselves in real danger of losing 2 of their last 4. And because one of the problems they might have is then they might be behind both Missouri and Texas in the pecking order of 2-loss teams in the SEC.
Yeah.
What would happen if Texas was 9-3 but beat an 8? There's just some interesting things. Right now, A&M's got that Notre Dame win. They need Notre Dame to continue to be really good, because once you get beyond that, A&M hasn't done a whole lot from a resume standpoint, but that's a hell of a good win for them. There's no way of getting around that. And if they beat Missouri this weekend, they've got both feet into the playoffs, regardless of what happens against Texas in Austin. So I think those are the stakes for A&M this weekend. You can make that Texas game almost unimportant with regards to the playoffs, only with regards to seeding would the Texas game matter, whereas it could feel pretty life or death if you don't win in Columbia this weekend.
All right, I want to get your thoughts on different things. Here, let's start here. This says, I need an answer as to why Notre Dame is the highest 2-loss team. C. Jenkins, I would understand that question. Catch, if Miami hadn't slipped, I could almost understand this argument. Can you lay this out for me? I get that Notre Dame's getting credit for a really close loss at home to A&M, but that loss to Miami, yes, it was close, but now Miami has slipped twice Why is Notre Dame still getting that love? Wouldn't Texas's strength of schedule, the close loss to Ohio State and 2 nice wins get them over Notre Dame?
Texas has the worst loss among the 4 losses in question.
Okay. So they're being punished for the Florida loss, and that's the answer.
I think Notre Dame is getting the same bump from its loss to A&M that Texas is getting from the loss to Ohio State. So right. I think those two, that's a 1-point loss for Notre Dame against A&M, 41-40. And that is currently the number 3 team in the country.
And if you're going to break those down, Texas was on the road. Notre Dame's is at home. That happened to them on their field.
I think it's a virtual wash.
Okay.
So then when it comes down to the losses, you've got Notre Dame losing to Miami by 3 on the road against a Miami team that is 18th in the rankings right now.
Right.
And, I think it's just a little problematic in terms of, I think that is their way of saying right now we are punishing you from the Florida game. I also think there's a little bit of an eyeball test. Notre Dame has looked really good the last month and a half. They really have. They've been, they beat a ranked USC team by double digits. They beat, even though Boston College was a little bit of a sludge, they win that game by 2 touchdowns. They beat NC State by 29. They beat Boise by 21. They beat Arkansas by 1 billion. They beat Purdue by 26. So they've played consistently a better brand of football. Even if Texas's resume might be slightly better, I think that they're looking at this and they're saying, well, look, they've got to win. So the USC Vanderbilt games probably cancel each other out from a value standpoint. USC's 19th, Vanderbilt is 16th. So then it's about Texas has the edge with the best win over Oklahoma than anything that Notre Dame currently has. Mm-hmm. But I think they're punishing them with the Florida game, knowing that Texas has some real resume statement wins that if they win out, no 2-loss team will be ranked ahead of them, period.
Yeah, no, I think that part I think is definitely true. So hopefully that answers your questions there, Jenkins. So real quick, Catch, let me just deal with this one. Davis says, why, if you're ranked 11, are they the first team out? Not familiar, a bit confused. So let's just remember the top 10 teams, usually top 10 are in, but you have to leave a spot for the G5, highest ranked G5, and you have to leave a spot for a conference champion if they're outside of the top 12. And right now that's where the ACC champion, Virginia, is. So Virginia has to come up into the group. Memphis is not even ranked, by the way, in this top 25. Memphis is not even a part of the first CFP, yet they get a spot because they're the highest ranked G5. They go all the way to 12. So the 2 Red River teams are sitting there at 11 and 12 on the, technically on the bad side of it this week because of that. So that's how you can be 11.
You almost would like the winner of the ACC to, at the end of the process, it doesn't matter now. But if it's Virginia or if it's Louisville or if it's Georgia Tech, if any of those 3 teams wins out, they'll be in the top 10. They'll be 11-1 going into the bowl. You want them to win the championship, and then you've got an extra spot to play with.
Right.
If all of those teams are outside, we just saw tonight how that will work.
Yeah, to me, if I'm Texas, what I want, Catch, is I want a clear champion in the Big 12, a clear champion in the ACC, and I want pure mess after that in those conferences. I want chalk. In fact, I'd want BYU to not lose. Just beat Tech like a drum this weekend in Lubbock. Beat them or anybody in the Big 12. Let it be mess after them. But you'll
still need them to beat Tech that second time.
That's fine. Just keep winning. And the same thing in the ACC. Give me a clear like BYU and Georgia Tech, let's say, and everybody else is a mess to where the losers of those title games are out. That is where you could have that extra slot that might let a Texas in if they slip one more time and lose a third game.
It's like being on the bubble in the college basketball when it's like 10-seeded Georgia Tech is playing first-seeded Duke in the ACC championship, and you're like, our instincts are go underdog.
Nope.
Unless you have a vest, so the whole country would be rooting for chaos And you're like, come on, BYU, handle your business for once in your life.
When you need an at-large, you need chalk.
Yep.
We all know that's the rule in basketball, and it definitely exists here. That's exactly what Texas will need if they have that third loss, which brings me back, Catch. This ultimately, I think, is what the other chatter was trying to say. Give me your updated thought right now. You see the ranking. If they split Georgia and A&M, the Horns are in. There's a group of Longhorn fans that believe this is true, that if they split those games, and I'm assuming they mean they lose that game in a competitive manner in one of those, that they're still in. Does this bracket tell you anything about what that could be?
They can't afford. Well, they would need some help. Look, if they lose a third game and nothing else happens above them, then look, Oregon's got one loss. There's a good chance that a 2-loss Oregon team would be rated. I don't know for sure, but I mean, they could have put Oregon down there with Virginia and Louisville if they wanted to. They didn't. They're behind Tech, but the committee didn't look at those 1-loss teams and Oregon with no resume, other than they've won all their games but one, is at 9. So they're positioning them ahead of. So presumably, if you were to say in a month from now, Oregon has 1 loss less than Notre Dame and Texas, it seems like Oregon would be positioned. Texas to lose 3 games, I think it really comes down to, can the ACC and the Big 12 be limited to 2 bids? It may literally come down to that. And it didn't a year ago, and who got squeezed? An Alabama with 3 losses. If a little chalk happens.
Right. If Clemson lost.
Simple as that.
Right. If SMU had beaten Clemson in that game, there's a spot, and it probably, I don't know if it's Bama for sure, but a lot of people think it would have been.
Probably would have been. You don't know how if the committee would have tinkered with it in that situation. It was easy to have Alabama as the next team in, first team out with 3 losses. They might have done some stuff if they didn't really want that. But then we would have a precedent. You know, we're still just so new into this. I don't think you can absolutely – look, I spent a lot of time this weekend looking at the numbers, looking at the – A&M is a good example. I think in order to have 3 losses, you need somebody in this top 9. And I don't mean BYU and Tech.
Okay.
You might need another one of those teams to surprisingly fall out.
Okay.
Hard to see Ohio State. Yeah, it's hard to see Ohio State and Indiana. Like, they could both lose games and still be in. So Ohio State could lose to Michigan. They're in. Okay. So you almost root for them because, you know, they can knock out a Michigan or devalue in Oklahoma's.
Yeah, they're part of the chalk. If I'm a Texas fan, I root for Ohio State and Indiana to win out, play each other in the title game, and you know they're both in, and there's no other Big Ten surprises.
Start looking at Alabama. Now, Georgia's easy to explain, but you look at the Ole Miss schedule. You start looking at BYU schedule after you start going down the list.
Yep.
There's not a lot of games that are obvious, like Notre Dame plays at Pitt, and that's an obvious, okay, in 2 weeks, that's one we've got to watch.
No doubt.
But the rest of these teams don't have a lot of those games. I don't say this because they're the Aggies. A&M has by far and away the most difficult schedule remaining of the top 10 teams. By far and away. They have to play at Missouri and at Texas. And, you know, if they lose at Missouri, there's just jeopardy in that Texas game with a bunch of stuff, right? Like, because
minimum, right. Because then minimum, that game is knocking them to the back end of the playoff, but it might, depending on everything else, it might be knocking them out.
Well, A&M suddenly with 2 losses against Texas, they can't be ahead of a Missouri team that would have 2 losses. And the one thing the committee, I think, did a real good job of this. I don't see a single example where they've like Virginia's ahead of Louisville. Now, they may think Louisville is better, but the committee has rewarded head-to-head.
Heads. Yeah. Right. And Texas over OU. I mean, they see it. If they're right there together, they've got them in the right spot.
The only real example of head-to-head not really working is Miami's at 18 and Notre Dame's at 10. And what the committee is saying is,
oh yeah,
we don't think you're any good, Miami.
Right, but that's one of those things. You put that much separation in teams between you. That's those 2 losses.
Exactly.
Right. One is one thing. It's 2 losses. Once you have that and the records are different, I mean, even though it's 2 loss, I get that they're both 2 loss teams, but once you have lost twice then since the victory, yeah, they're going to put space between you and not think about the head-to-head.
No, there's no doubt. And I think if I'm Tennessee, I think if you're Tennessee, you would hoped you would have been ahead of Washington and Pitt.
Yeah. Tennessee's a weird case because their 3 losses are nothing to sneeze at. Georgia, Bama, OU. Those are their 3 losses. If they win out and their games are at Florida and Vanderbilt, Tennessee will get a win against Vanderbilt at home if they win out. So then, Catch, you're talking about a 3-loss team there that will have, I would argue, a 9-3 this year, a 9-3 SEC team. The argument will feel different. In theory,
their problem is that they're a little bit like Oregon, that their wins, they just don't have. That's what the OU game robbed them of. If Tennessee wins that game, they're 10th on this list, I think.
Yeah, the only good win they have a chance for now is Vanderbilt. It's a good point. But unlike last year, my point was going to be at least the SEC losses would be easier to argue. Because last year, Bama had 2 horrible ones. And
no doubt.
Ole Miss had a bad one. And South Carolina had one that was shaky. They're a little more solid this year in terms of that idea. We did get a super chat from Patrick, who ran some simulations. He says ESPN Simulator gives Texas a 72-ish% chance to make the CFP if they drop the game to Georgia. You can run the simulations on your own. So, Catch, that's kind of the setup maybe if you're thinking of it. Let's think it is a close loss at Athens. You come back and you beat the Aggies in Austin, giving you 3 really nice wins at that point. Then this ranking tonight tells me if it was like 10-2 Notre Dame going up against a 9-3 Texas in that scenario, I don't think beating the Aggies would be enough. I think Notre Dame would get the nod over Texas if it came down to those 2. I think that's kind of what they're telling us tonight. If you're saying with the same number of losses, you're still putting the Irish above Texas, which I disagree with. I would put Texas above them, but they're telling us that tonight. So I do think it tells us, hey, Texas is going to have to find a spot that's not Notre Dame. If Notre Dame keeps winning, Texas may need another spot if they're 9-3. To your earlier point, though, if you win out here, you're going to take somebody's spot, probably Georgia's. And maybe the Georgias and then the Aggies. You might take both their spots if you keep rolling.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you for the super chat. The first rankings are out. Texas is that first team out technically. And the 4 SEC teams that are ranked the highest, those highly ranked teams, those 4 are in. A&M at 3, Bama 4, Georgia 5, and Ole Miss at 6. 3. So 4 SEC, 3 Big Ten. Am I looking at it right, Catch? Yeah, Oregon and then Indiana and Ohio State. So that is the first ranking that is out. Any other issues we need to hit here on the
No, I think in and out, 30 minutes. I don't know that there's anything else to discuss. I think we've laid it all out. Win Texas, 9-3 is not a death sentence, but I think you're gonna need some help. And I don't care what the ESPN thing is saying. They probably have a metric that the winner of the game this weekend probably becomes a bigger favorite in the championship game because they'll distance themselves out. I don't know. What I know is I can count to like 10, 11, and 12. And 9-3 just isn't impossible at all. But, man, you might be sweating some serious-ass bullets on championship Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. Real quick question before we wrap, Catch. For Texas fans, especially those older Texas fans, would you tell them that when they sit in their comfy chair this Saturday, they root like hell for A&M and Texas Tech to lose? Is that what they should do?
Well, I don't think the Tech BYU game matters.
Okay, so just whatever in that game.
You need to decide who do you think wins on a neutral field?
Okay.
Because that's what you need to happen. It doesn't matter because look,
you need a double.
You
need the same team to win that game twice, is what you're saying.
That would put Tech at 3 losses. They're out. And that would put BYU at 2 losses, but to the same team twice.
Yeah.
And you look at the rest of their resume, they're undefeated, but they're not getting undefeated respect. They're getting, you can be ranked ahead of the 2-loss teams, and you can be ranked ahead of Tech, but you don't get to be ranked, and you can be ranked ahead of Oregon. You know what? They threw them an Oregon a bone.
Mm.
They're like, you know what? You're undefeated. You can be ahead of Oregon, but they told them you don't get to be ahead of Ole Miss. And like Ole Miss's resume is not bulletproof. They're good, and I think we all think they could be undefeated with some bounces going their way, but they're not.
Right. And they're also one of those teams that, unlike last year, if they keep rolling here, their losses their loss right now, it's just one, right? They've just lost the game to Georgia.
No, they've got 1 foot in.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a quality loss too. They've had those weird losses, but if they can keep rolling, they are in.
They're in a group of, I think there are 5 teams that are in, and it's the 2 Big Ten teams, and then the 3 Big 12, ACC group of 5. There are 5 that are in. I think there's another 5 that have 1 foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame is in if they win out, guys.
No doubt. I don't think that's a question, and that's where, again, you don't want it to be that battle. Even if you're Texas, even if you're Texas with that branding, the only way you're going to be above Notre Dame is if you go 10-2.
And then they would.
There's no way they'll ignore you if you beat Georgia and you beat A&M. No way. The committee will jump ahead of Notre Dame, and the Irish will. And
it was, I thought, really important to see how they would position Texas and Notre Dame. I knew they'd be ranked ahead of Oklahoma. The committee wasn't going to do that. Where they slotted those 2 teams is memorable the rest of the way. It just tells us.
I know.
What they think of however they got there, that's where they are now. And what has to happen in a tie? We know that right now, if Texas loses the tie to 1 team.
Yep.
And
that's a good point.
It's not an insignificant tie-break disadvantage. As evidence, tonight, 10 gets in, 11 does not. And we may be in a situation where that exact thing happens if we see upsets on Championship Saturday. And it feels more likely that something will go against the people rooting for chalk on Championship Saturday than it's likely that everything will go the way that you want it to.
Yep, that's it. You got to keep control as long as you can. As we sign off, let me show it to you one more time. Here is the updated bracket. The first CFP, Texas, the first team out, Oklahoma, the second team out, and you can see the rest of it there. Thank y'all for jumping in.
Real quick, Chad, last comment.
Yeah.
Texas doesn't have a game this weekend, so they'll be in next week by default. Because the loser of Oregon and Tech will fall out.
Yeah,
and
BYU Tech. BYU Tech.
I mean, that's what I meant. Yeah, BYU Tech. Sorry.
Yep.
BYU Tech loser will be out. So one of those 2 teams will fall back. And so Texas, at worst, will be the 10 next week. And Notre Dame would bump up to the 9 if everything holds. And there's just that 1 loss. So this time next week, when they go into the Georgia game, it'll be the opposite of tonight. Next week, they don't have to do anything. They will be in next week's projected 12-team bracket, which means they'll have some real jeopardy going into that game in Athens, because this time next week, this will look different.
Thank you guys for jumping in. Check out all the content at Orange Bloods Live. And of course, get signed up at orangebloods.com. Enjoy your bye week as it rolls on. Check us out live every day at noon.